Hi guys, it's time for another ranking my last, I'm embarrassed to say how many palettes I have here, but I think it's 17. Usually I try not to let it go any further than 10, but honestly, a lot just kind of happened and this just, I have no excuse, okay? It's just a lot. And I had COVID in the middle of this and then I was gonna film it after and then I felt so backed up. I was like, I gotta keep going with the new stuff because I just don't have time. So here I am, we're gonna rank the last 17 palettes that I have tried, and it's a lot. I have not made dedicated videos with all of these, but I have tried and used all of them in my makeup diary series, so if you haven't watched those episodes, would highly recommend checking those out if you're interested in seeing the looks that I've done with these without doing like full tutorials or reviews, but I do give reviews in those as well, and I will let you know my thoughts of all of these palettes in this video. So we're just gonna go ahead and start. Like I said, I have these are so heavy. I think 17 palettes. So we're just gonna start on the bottom. I will have the number on the screen because I just want to make sure that I don't forget where I'm at. This is so hard. It hurts me so bad to put this palette on the bottom because it's from a brand that I absolutely love, but this was just a palette that I was just like, I felt like I was least likely to want to reach for out of all of these, and it's the new Nomad Santa's Village palette. This was a limited edition Christmas palette, and even though the mattes in this are nice, I just struggled a lot with these shimmers. They just weren't really my favorite. They're very on the sheer side. I felt like I really needed to use a finger to apply them with, which I hate using my finger to apply eyeshadows. And they were just really hard to pick up on a brush. I felt like I couldn't get a smooth application on my lids. If I picked up like too much, if I had really like dug in there to actually get shadow on my brush, it would end up looking clumpy and like just not very nice on the lid. So just not the biggest fan of this. I love the color story. I think the idea behind it is really cool, but execution wise it just didn't really work out for me, which like I said makes me sad because I love the idea behind it, and Nomad has had so many hits lately that I really thought that this was going to be more like their newer releases and not like some of the older palettes that they've had in the past, because I felt like the shimmers in here reminded me a lot of the quad that they did for the holidays, the all shimmer quad they had quite a while ago, like 2 years ago. And the shimmers are also similar to the ones in the Tokyo palette. If you have that one, if you like that one, maybe you would like these, but these are just a little too sheer for what I prefer in my shimmers. Next up, this one also hurts me to put so low down, but it's a color story thing for me with a lot of these palettes, and it's just, this color story is not something that I can really see myself wanting to reach for as a standalone palette, and I do feel like I have to judge these palettes as standalone palettes because otherwise I wouldn't have anything to base anything on, because if I could just mix and match all my palettes every single day, then I don't know, there would always be like one shade in the palette that I would want to reach for that palette for in particular, and there's a shade in this palette which is the Teresa is Lethal palette. The silver in this is so freaking beautiful. Like, this is one of the best silvers that I have ever used. It's so sparkly, so beautiful, it looks so smooth on the lid, and it's stunning. But I just feel like this color story is something that I really have to like think about in order to use, and it doesn't come naturally to me what looks to do with this palette when I look at it. And sometimes I don't want to have to sit for 5 minutes and look at my palette and be like, how is this gonna work together, you know? And I feel like I really have to think about this in order to get like good looks out of it, and I don't always want to be that creative. Sometimes I just want everything to be laid out for me in a way that just makes sense, and I feel like I have to really like, you know, get my wheels spinning in order to come up with a look to do with that palette. Next up is another one that, it's a color story thing. I'm sorry, Betty Jean, but this is the Halloween palette. The formulas in here are so nice, but for me, I don't know what it is. It's just the shimmers in here are a little bit too dark for my liking, and especially these two. I'm not the biggest fan of like black-based shimmers. And I also just feel like it's very easy for things to get sort of muddy if you want to use a lot of these shades together. Like, of course, you could do like the very obvious thing and only stick to the oranges, only stick to the greens, or maybe the greens and the blues. But I just feel like it's just not a color story that I'm very drawn to. I mostly bought this palette because I wanted to support the collab because I love Betty Jean. But it's, like I said, it's a color story that I just don't really see myself wanting to reach for that often. The next palette is a very, very small palette that usually smaller palettes just end up lower down because they're not as versatile, and that is the only reason why this palette ended up lower down. And I also just feel like standalone wise, it's a very hard palette to use and you can't really get that many looks out of it, but the formulas in here are beautiful. So this is the Shall We Makeup Liana palette. It looks like this. I did do a dedicated video with this palette along with their highlighting palette, and these shimmers are stunning, especially these two right here. So pretty. But I do have a palette in this ranking that is honestly very similar to this palette that just has a little bit more to offer, which is why this palette ended up so low down. It also only has one matte, so I did pull in a black just to kind of ground it a little bit because I felt like these darker shimmers needed it. And also, like I said, it has very dark shimmers in it. I'm not the biggest fan of like super dark shimmers, so it just ended up being kind of low down. The next palette. This palette is really nice. I really like the mattes in it. This is the Alice in Wonderland palette from Sigma. I like this color story a lot, but I do wish the shimmers were just a little bit more. I just need a little bit more. Like, I felt really pretty the times that I used this palette, but if I'm going to use, or when I should say, when I reach for this palette again, is going to only be for the mattes and not for the shimmers. But I do like that there is a lot of mattes in here. There's only, well, actually there's more shimmers than I kind of thought, but there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mattes that are beautiful and very versatile. So I can definitely see myself using this palette for the mattes, but since I have so many beautiful shimmers in my collection that I absolutely love, and I can't say I love these, I think they're nice, but I just know myself that I'm not going to reach for this palette for the shimmers alone. The next palette is a palette that has honestly kind of the opposite problem. This palette has beautiful shimmers, but the mattes are a little lacklusting, a little sheer, just not my perfect kind of mattes, but they're very workable and I don't mind them per se. This is a Twisted Cherry palette from Wicked Widow, and I used this in, like I said, one of my makeup diary videos. I did a look with this and I loved the look. I felt so pretty in it. You guys know how I feel about this kind of shade in particular. Oh, I just love it so much. And I think that honestly, the matte selection in this palette is very pretty. This would be like the perfect sort of Valentine's-y palette, I feel like, especially with the tones in here. I have to say though that the red definitely leans very pink. So if you're looking for a true red, I don't think that you find it in this palette, but I think the idea behind this is really good. I like this palette, but it's never gonna end up being my favorite because the mattes just aren't really my favorites. Next up, I'm going to combine the next two palettes since they are in the same collection, and I feel like they just kind of end up in the same ballpark. So these are the Scooby-Doo palettes from Glamlight, and I think the reason why these didn't end up higher is just because I feel like they're a little too dark leaning for my liking, especially the shimmers. Like, there's a lot of black based shimmers in these palettes, and that's just not really my favorites. I love the color stories though. I think they're beautiful, but again, they're very dark leaning, and I do prefer something that just has more of a broader range. Like, I do like light tones as well. Like, I want very light tones to very dark tones, and I feel like these are a little bit too light to be standalone palettes, but again, I can see myself using these along with other things, but as standalone palettes, this is just kind of where they're going to end up. The next palette here is probably a palette that some of you maybe expected me to put lower down, but I feel like because of the versatility of this palette is why it ended up as high as it did, and this is the new Pat McGrath, I always forget the name of it, Celestial Nirvana palette. Now, I know I'm like bashing on this and I'm like, I don't really like the shimmers in it, and I really don't like the shimmers in it, but honestly, there's not that many shimmers in it, so it's like okay because I get all these beautiful matte shades, and I do think the selection of mattes here is very well curated. Like, it's so easy to do looks with them. There's something that goes with everything, and I really appreciate that. It makes me realize that this is definitely made by someone who actually does their own makeup, and who does their own makeup in a way that makes sense. Like, you always want to make sure that the mattes that you pick in a palette can be blend together, they work well together, the shimmers work well with the mattes, like color wise, and I feel like they really, I mean, it's Pat McGrath, she's a makeup artist, of course she knows what she's doing, but it just makes sense to me, and I appreciate that, and I really do see myself using these mattes again. I'd probably not use the shimmers, but I have so many shimmers in my collection that I don't need them. And you will see that later on in the video, that a lot of the palettes that ended up higher up have a lot of beautiful shimmers that I love. So when I was talking about the Liana palette, this is the palette that I was thinking about that's kind of similar, and this is the Rephr Treat palette from Sugar Drizzle. This is the most fun 6-pan palette I think that I have in my collection. It is so cool, it's so cute, and it's so versatile for being 6 shades. Like, I love the selection of these 3 mattes together because it makes it possible to do so many different looks. And I just think this is really, really fun. Like, you could do a crease with these 2, you could do a crease with these 2, you can use the mattes on their own, and all the shimmers and all the mattes kind of go together, except for the red, which the red goes very nicely with these 2. So I really like this. I think it is a beautiful, well-curated palette. It has a very light shimmer, it has a very dark matte, it has pretty much everything in between. I think this is really, really fun, and also just the theming, Rephr Treat. I just love Sugar Drizzle, okay? Next palette here is a palette from the Halloween collection from Unearthly Cosmetics, and this is the Warms My Blood palette. But before I show you this, you've probably seen it already. Now, they did reach out to me before they were launching these, and they were like, hey, pick out a palette that you want to get sent in PR. I did pick out a palette, and it was the So Strange palette, I think, is the one that I ended up choosing, but I think that package just ended up getting lost in the mail because I never received it. And this is actually a palette that I bought myself after launch because I couldn't stop thinking about it. I thought it was just so beautiful. And like, look at this. This is one of the most beautiful sort of neutral-y palettes with pops of color in it that I've ever seen. It's so pretty. I haven't done like a dedicated video with this, but I did bring this on my trip when I went to a wedding in Canada, and I used this a few times, and I really wish I could put this higher, but oh my god, these shimmers, they crease on me so badly and they just disappear from my eyes. Like, I don't usually have that, I mean, usually shimmers like this that are super creamy will crease on me, but they will at least stay on my eyes enough that I can just kind of smooth it out. But these just disappeared. Like, I don't know what it is. My eyelids just ate them, and it looked horrendous even after just a few hours. And thankfully, the day that I wore this palette, I was able to go back to my hotel room and like tap over another shimmer from another brand to kind of save it, because this would not last well on me. So that makes me really sad. But the mattes in this are so beautiful, like so pretty. And I mean, I'll admit I haven't used all of these shimmers. I've used a couple of them a few more times, but for the most part, like the ones that look the shiniest in the pan are obviously the ones that I'm the most drawn to because they are the prettiest ones, and those are the ones that I can tell you crease. I did use this shade actually all over my lid with like a big brown wing that I did for my travel day going home, and this one wore nicely, but that is a very satiny shade. So like this shade, this shade, this shade, those are fine. This is the one that creased really bad. Like all these 3 shades up here in the corner creased so badly. This one I haven't used. This one is fine. This one I think I used once. It also creased on me. So it makes me a little bit sad that I'm not really able to make this palette work for me because the color story is so pretty, and I think that it could have easily ended up being like one of my absolute favorite palettes if it wasn't for the formula being so creamy. And like I said, for the most part, shadows like that crease on me, but not that badly, and not to the point where they're just not even on my eyes anymore. The next palette is a palette that I also have not done a dedicated video with, but I also brought this palette on my trip. I was gone for 5 days, so I had quite some time to like play with these palettes while I was gone. And this is the Glamlight and Barbie palette. This is a beautiful palette. The more I kind of use this, the more I loved it. I think it is so pretty, and I actually wore this for the wedding day itself. I used, I want to say this one in my crease or something like that. I played with like the purples and the blues, and it was so pretty. I've also dipped into these brown shades, which are really pretty too. The shimmers are stunning. I think they really did something with this palette, and when I first got it, honestly, when I first saw them sneak peek this, I'll be honest, I was like, I kind of hope they don't send me this because I don't care for Barbie like whatsoever. Like the theming of this, I think is very childish, and it's just not really like my thing. Like Barbie, like I'm old. Like I've never been a Barbie person. I was the kind of person who would play with cars when I was a kid. So for me, this is just kind of like, you know, but oh my god, the color story is so pretty and the palette is stunning. So I'm not mad that I have it at all. It's just I wish the theming was different. If this had a different theme, this palette may have even ended up on top. It's just looking at it, I'm just like, ugh. Next up, let's move on. This is a palette that has beautiful, 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 beautiful shimmers in it. These do crease a little bit, but not to the same extent as the Unearthly palette. And this is from Spellbound Beauty. It's the Witchcraft palette. This kind of comes in and out of stock all the time. It's a very affordable palette. They did send me this. It's from an Etsy store, and the palette looks like this. So I would just keep your eye on their site. I don't know if they really announce their restocks, if they have like an email you can sign up for or anything like that, but this palette is like $20, which is insane. And it has beautiful shimmers in it. I don't know how many times I can say this. The mattes are also quite nice. I do feel like they're a little repetitive. Like a lot of them kind of look a little bit similar. But I'm not even mad at it because this color story is so pretty. And it's just, I love these shimmers. I don't know what else to tell you. The next 4 palettes, I struggled so much to rank these because I feel like they all could have ended up in the #1 spot just depending on my mood. So we're just gonna start. I think I'm gonna bundle these 2 together because these are also from the same collection, and I simply just can't choose between them. So these are the holiday palettes from Odens Eye. Oh my god, they're so beautiful. Oh, these are, I think, honestly some of my favorite color stories that Odens Eye has ever done, and that even goes for counting the collabs, because these are absolutely insanely stunning, and there is nothing I don't like about these. I think all of the shimmers in these palettes are so freaking beautiful, and I can't wait to use these again. Like, these are the palettes that I think about, I dream about, I want to use again, and I love them. They're so beautiful. I don't even know what else to say. I think, like, if I had to choose one at this very moment, I would probably go with this one because I feel like I've been kind of into warm tones lately, and I just love the shimmers. How many times can I say that? These are so stunning. I mean, I'm sorry they're sold out now, but they're great. I hope you bought them. The next palette is a palette that there is something about all shimmer palettes for me that I never get sick of them. I don't know what it is. I've probably said it in many videos, but I think the reason why I like all shimmer palettes is because it allows me to play with more of my collection, and I love mixing and matching, and having an all shimmer palette, it forces me to mix and match, and that just means that I get to be more creative and use what I want to use. And this is the Bella Beauty Bar Angles of Illumination 3 palette. I love it. There's nothing I don't like about this palette. I think it's stunning. I've used pretty much every shade in here. These wear very well on me despite being very creamy, so I really like the formulas in here. I think it is stunning. I like that most of these are on the lighter to mid-tone side, and none of them are super dark except for like these 2, which these 2 shades are honestly really nice as sort of like bridging shades between like mattes and some of these other shimmers, so I don't even mind that they're in this palette. I think the only shade I haven't used in here is this one. I think I've dipped into all of the other shades, but the only reason I haven't used this is just because it's like a bronzy shade. I just don't care for that, but the palette itself, absolutely stunning. I love it. Now the palette in the #1 spot, I never thought I'd be this person, but honestly, I gotta give it to Blend Bunny. I don't know what it is. Like, there is something about the Blend Bunny palettes, about the formulas, about the layouts, it's just so satisfying. I think that's what it comes down to. Like, my Blend Bunny palettes are so satisfying, not only to look at, but also to use. And I wouldn't change a thing about this palette. I think it's perfect. Okay, maybe one thing. I think these 2 shades are a little too similar. But that is probably the only thing that I would change. I think the rest of the palette is stunning. The mattes are so good. This silver shade is my favorite silver in my collection. I think I like this one more than the one in the Teresa is Lethal palette. There's something about this shade that is so ethereal and looks so pretty, but so sparkly and so wet looking and so amazing, and it wears so well. And you did it again, Blend Bunny. You did it again. I love you so much. So those are going to be my rankings. Are you surprised by any of these? I know that my top palette is very neutral for what I normally go for, but I've been kind of into neutrals lately, and I love pairing, like, listen, these 2 palettes together, a dream made in heaven. I don't know what to tell you. I just love them. I think that they're so good. I'm just so grateful that I'm in a position where I get to try out so many palettes and get a lot of these sent in PR. I think maybe I bought, how many of these did I buy myself? Maybe like 5? So a lot of these are PR, which, like I said, I'm so grateful because buying makeup is expensive, as I'm sure you guys know. So I love that I get to do this for you guys and test these out and give you my recommendations and hopefully help you spend your money wisely and get things that you're absolutely going to love. So I hope that these ranking videos are helpful. Let me know if you have any of these palettes and which ones are your favorite. What is the favorite palette that you have bought lately? I would love to know about it. So it's going to be it for today. If you want to see some more ranking videos, I of course have a playlist. I'll put that right there. And if you're new, don't forget to subscribe and I'll see you in my next one.